Welcome to Alberta Conservation Association's Harvest Your Own podcast, the resource for everything hunting, navigating through the field, the butcher shop, and the kitchen. Life is all about great food. Let's get started.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Brad Fenson, an avid outdoor enthusiast who has worked as a freelance journalist, photographer, and public speaker for over 3 decades. I have hunted, fished, and foraged all my life and hope to share my passion for the outdoors. Along the way, I want to encourage everyone to harvest wild proteins and enjoy the satisfaction of providing the next meal for your family. Our goal is to educate, entertain, and inspire individuals to get outdoors and create a connection between food, health, and your future meals. Welcome to Harvest Your Own. Today we have an interesting guest with some interesting information about hunting in Alberta and changes to the Wildlife Act. I'd like to introduce Brian Joubert, who is the Senior Fish and Wildlife Policy Analyst in the Hunting and Fishing Branch. Is that close?
It's really close until about last week. Now I'm the manager of game use and allocation.
Oh, wow.
But
congrats.
most of this work was done when I was in that previous role. But thank you.
Yeah. A lot of listeners might not know that there is a hunting and fishing branch within our department nowadays, helping take care of hunting, fishing, wildlife, fisheries, everything that we're passionate about.
Yep, that's exactly right. So we're an offshoot or a split from the previous Fish and Wildlife Stewardship Branch, and Fish and Wildlife, as people knew it. And Minister Lowen brought us into Forestry and Parks. That's the ministry where we're housed. And so, our focus is very much hunting, fishing, trapping, sustainable use, game species, setting allocations, regulations, working with our colleagues in environment and protected areas to do population assessments and, engage with stakeholders. So we're a pretty new branch, been finding our feet and getting a lot of work done. So it's been a busy 2 years, as we will talk about now.
Now, I always like to talk a little bit about our guests so that people know a little bit more about you. But Brian, you're a hunter, an angler,
yep,
and I would say a whitewater enthusiast. Is that correct?
Probably now that I have a mortgage and kids and drive a desk, I don't do that as much as I used to. But I ended up in Western Canada because I used to be a whitewater guide. So that's what I did. I applied that trade for many years, and that's my misspent youth. Played on whitewater rivers around the world.
Right.
Yeah.
And there is a little bit of an accent, so people, if they can't recognize it, you did grow up in South Africa?
That's right, yeah. I was born and bred South African, started my career there, and then ended up here, as I said, guiding whitewater rivers, and, met my wife and thought I would hang out with her for a little while. Ended up back in grad school, and here we are.
Wow. That's pretty significant.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we're glad to have you here. There's no doubt about that. We've had a little bit of time to visit over the years at Waterfall Warm-Up and some other events, but thanks for coming in. This is important stuff. I think hunters in Alberta are going to be very keen to hear some of the changes to the Wildlife Act. What is the Wildlife Act exactly?
Well, the Wildlife Act is the single overarching piece of legislation that provides guidance for the governance and subsequent regulation of wildlife in Alberta, so game species at risk, and it creates regulation-making authorities for the sitting minister who's responsible, or ministers who are responsible for that act.
Right, and over the years I've been involved in conservation, hunting, fishing committees, all this. I always heard those would require us opening the act to make that change, so it's not likely it's going to occur very quickly.
No, and that's a good question. So there's the Act, and then the Act has its regulations, which is pretty common in legislation, right? You'll have an Act, and then the Act will have its set of regulations. And so every year, prior to hunting season, we make adjustments and amendments to season dates and a few other things, and we make a pretty simple change through a ministerial order. That's quite easy to do to a regulation.
Right.
The Act requires Lieutenant General Order in Council, and it has to go to cabinet and get approved by the various committees. Cabinet, you've got to get cabinet scheduling. So this project started in 2021, and it was a follow-up from a previous review, which didn't include the Act, that started in 2014, that I actually did for the department while I was a consultant, and that only came to fruition in 2020.
Wow.
We started this in 21, we just got approval in 25. So it's definitely not a sprint. It's usually a bit of a marathon.
It's not a sprint, but it's really important for people to understand this. This doesn't happen overnight. We don't get the opportunity to open the act to make significant changes even once a decade. So, I mean, it's just a rare occasion, but you guys really stepped up and brought it home is what I'll say. How many changes approximately?
To the act and the regulation, every time I try to count it, I come up with a different number because there's multiple changes that speak to the same theme or issue, but it's over 70. And if we count every edit we made to both pieces of legislation, it's well over 200.
Wow.
So it's a lot.
You've been immersed in this and know it backwards and forwards, and you're probably the most versed person on it.
Well, we'll see. Ask me some questions and we'll see how it goes. But some of it can be a little bit nuanced. But as you said, we haven't cracked the act, and I asked some of my colleagues and no one can really remember.
Right. And that's what I heard for years is we can't do that because it requires us to open the act. Yeah. So, a big congratulations. I think it modernizes our Wildlife Act and brings us into the current world, in terms of how things are managed and how resources are allocated and harvested in other parts of North America.
Yep, I agree. There's a lot of really good changes in here that were many years in the making, and that, in fact, many stakeholders and many advisory committees had asked for many, many years. So,
yes. So let's dive right in. Let's get into some of these changes and talk about them so that people can know and understand them before the hunting season's open. I think a big one for me when I first heard it was a change in age requirements for hunters.
That's right. So it was traditionally 12, and then a number of years ago, 2020, I believe, we reduced it to 10 to be eligible to hold a license for game birds.
Correct.
We've now made it 10 for big game as well. So it's uniform. And in a jurisdictional scan, most of Canada's around 12. So, I think there were maybe a couple of provinces who were a bit younger. And so a 10-year-old can now enter draws and buy licenses. However, I'm not sure how long it'll be before this is live, but our system, because this came into force fairly recently, our licensing system hasn't caught up. And unfortunately, 10-year-olds, I'm sitting here today on the 16th, we've got 3 more days of draw, and I apologize, you can't put in for a draw as a 10-year-old.
Right.
You will be able to buy a license on the 1st of August.
Right. So they have to be 11 to apply for the draw this year, but next year when licensing catches up, 10-year-olds should be able to apply.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now that's significant. I know I've got some grandsons that are doing cartwheels and are pretty excited about getting out this year. But it's not the only change. That's on big game, but there's also some changes for bird game hunters.
Exactly. So now a youth under 10 can hunt game birds without a license. It's a license exemption. They have to be supervised by an adult who does have a license, and the youth doesn't get their own bag. So there's no bag limit for the youth. It's counted towards the adult's bag limit. So if you're hunting roughies and it's 5 a day, it's 5 between the adult and the youth. And if the youth is hunting migratory birds, they still need the youth migratory bird hunting permit from the federal government, which is available online and it's free.
Oh, nice. So
they need that.
Yeah, there'll be maybe some debate about this, but some kids are ready to start hunting much sooner than 10 years of age. The excitement levels there, they have the stature to shoot different firearms and be successful. So I think that's a great way to introduce kids to hunting and get them hooked at an early age, because they are our future as well. Getting people involved at a young age helps us to take them through their life and through adulthood.
I agree, and I think it's a nice change that provides parents or guardians with discretion. If you think your child is skilled and emotionally mature enough to harvest game at 10, now you can.
Right.
If you think they need to wait, well, you can wait. Train them.
Good way to put it. We're going to try to go through these a bit quicker because there's a lot to cover, but let's talk about residency requirements.
So this came from, maybe years ago when there was a lot of temporary workers coming in to Alberta, and you could, by the definition of a resident, arrive here and say, Alberta is my permanent primary residence, even though you arrived yesterday. And so some residents were getting a little bit upset by that and saying, you need to put a time limit on that. So we have done that now. It's the same residency definition. You have to have been, a citizen, permanent resident, or permitted to live in Canada for the 12 preceding months. Alberta is your primary residence. You can only have one primary residence,
right,
and it is Alberta. And now you have to have had that primary residence in Alberta for 6 months preceding the relevant date. So, and stakeholders asked us this for years and years and years.
Yeah, I think it happens everywhere else.
Yes.
And some of the territories, I believe the Yukon and Northwest Territories, Nunavut, you have to be there 12 months.
I think NWT may have even been 2 years at one point, but it's now down to a year. But you're correct, a year at least. Yeah.
Another modernization.
Yep.
Yeah, nice.
This podcast is produced for Harvest Your Own, a program dedicated to those who want to reconnect with food and health through their experiences outdoors. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a resource for individuals to learn more about hunting and the outdoors. There's information to get you started and ensure that your compass stays pointed in the right direction to be successful. Where's your next meal coming from?
Some changes to crossbow licenses. Basically, it's going to disappear.
Correct. The crossbow license has now been repealed. It doesn't exist. You don't need to apply for it. However, the medical eligibility form, the exemption form that people were filling out, taking to their medical practitioner to get signed and approved, is still valid. You have to have that. And now we've placed the onus on the actual holder. So we got rid of the red tape and the permit. You still need to fill out the form, get it signed by your medical practitioner, and it has to be filled out. And I stress completely.
Right.
No missing information, because then it's invalid and you cannot use a crossbow. So it's your responsibility to fill it out. But all you got to do is fill that out, get it signed, carry it with you if you're using a crossbow in an archery-only season.
Yeah, carry it with you just like you would have the crossbow license when it was available.
Correct.
Yeah. Good change. Migratory game birds and boats.
Yeah, this was an interesting one. You had to have a powered boat anchored to shoot at a migratory bird in Alberta, but the actual federal migratory bird regulation just requires that the forward motion caused by the motor, and interestingly enough, any sail, so if you're shooting your ducks from a sailboat in Alberta, has to have ceased. So now if you have a powered boat and you're shooting on the water at migratory birds, you don't have to have the boat anchored. You just have to have the forward momentum caused by the motor has to have stopped before you fire. So this, if you're shooting divers and you wound a bird and you want to get to it to try and finish it, it's just a lot quicker now than having a whole anchor.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, you can drift around or do whatever is required to just not have forward motion from the motor.
That's right.
Yeah. Black bears and dogs. That's a big one as well.
This is a new one, yeah. So we've had a few requests and, entertained black bear predation on caribou as an additional factor on top of, wolf predation. And so we have permitted the use of dogs to hunt black bears in some of the western WMUs that overlap, and the list is online, it'll be in the regs, the WMUs that overlap caribou habitat where there's currently no baiting allowed, and it'll only be in the fall season. So September and October only during an open season.
Well, I know some houndsmen that'll be happy to hear that.
I'm sure they will, because it gives them now another 2 months in the fall where they can run their hounds and train them.
Absolutely. No, that's a big one. Let's stay on the topic of dogs, tracking dogs.
Yeah, tracking dogs. So in 2014, we polled almost 4,000 Albertans on this, and people were fairly divided, but generally in favor, as long as there were means to still prevent the active hunting of big game with dogs. So you can still hunt cougars with dogs and now black bears. You can still have a pack dog in the 400s, which was a 2020 change, but now you can have a tracking dog. The tracking dog has to be leashed all the time and only brought into the area once the animal's been shot at. So essentially it's a blood tracker. And so there is a chapter of United Blood Trackers in Alberta, and they have been quite active, always seeking permission from enforcement to go and trial their dogs in certain situations. But now I'm quite excited by this. I think it's been really popular in the US, and a lot more states have allowed it. And so hopefully there'll be things like services where if you arrow a deer and you can't find it, you run out of blood, and you can look at a list online and phone someone who's got a wire-haired dachshund in your area who's trained it to blood track. And they can, exactly. They can help you find the deer. I think it's pretty good.
It is. And I've been in camps in the States where they've actually called tracking dogs. Somebody will shoot a big deer and they say, look, let's just back out. Let's not ruin the scent. Let's call in some tracking dogs. And it's amazing how well they work.
And we have an article in the upcoming 2025 hunting guide. We do have an article by someone who is extremely passionate and experienced with tracking dogs. So that'll be some good information for hunters in there. Yeah.
I know a couple of myself, some guys that have teckles, and they're quite tickled to be able to. I think they'd rather use their dogs than hunt themselves.
That seems to be the way with a lot of people that hunt with dogs, be it birds or whatever it may be, that, the dog becomes the focus more than the hunting.
Yeah. What about prohibited calibers?
Yeah, so prohibited ammunition, well, we'll just talk about calibers, used to be 0.23 of an inch. So effectively it said nothing less than a 6 mil or a 243 cal. We've now lowered that to be 22, which is in short means you can use centerfire 22s in Alberta now because they're all bigger than 0.22. They're usually 224. So your 223, your 22 250, or 22 Creedmoor, those are all legal now. Bullets have just got better. There's faster twists in barrels. People are shooting heavier bullets. And I think sometimes hunters get a bit wrapped up in head stamps and old myths. If you think those are too small, don't use them. But the evidence we've looked at and what I've done in other jurisdictions is they are extremely effective on deer-sized game. Low recoil, fun to shoot.
Yeah, it's interesting. There will be some debate because whenever you talk about calibers, there's always experts that think they're experts. But accuracy can never be outperformed by bigger bullets.
Shot placement, bullet construction, then head stamp.
Yeah.
Put it where it needs to go and the bullet expands. That's it. That's what you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I've seen that in lots of other states and provinces as well. Interesting one. Cormorants, do they fall under migratory waterfowl?
Not entirely, no. But we do have a season now that will parallel ducks, just to keep it simple for everyone. If ducks are open, double-crested cormorants are open. You don't have to eat them. So if somebody's going, well, and so we've had a number of requests from stakeholders in more northerly parts of the province who would like to, do additional cormorant control. Ontario followed a similar path, and whether it's effective or not, time will tell. We have been issuing damage control licenses in certain places to control cormorant numbers, but now we've added a season to see how it goes. So if you do shoot cormorants, you have to retrieve them. We don't want to leave them floating on the lake because it may be a bit of an eyesore for non-hunters in sort of busier parts. And you have to retrieve them, dispose of them, but you don't have to eat them.
Yeah, so it's all about respect.
Correct.
Yep. Well, it'll be interesting. I know there's lots of people with trout ponds, and there's lots of concerns about a lot of our fisheries too. So cormorant populations have expanded well beyond what they were 20, 30 years ago.
That's the primary rationale, and that's a good point you brought up, trout ponds, because an additional change will allow you to shoot double-crested cormorants on private land without a license. So that's a license exemption. So if you have a dugout with trout in it, on private land, you can shoot double-crested cormorants if they're a pest.
Well, it's interesting. The one thing that people never expected when they opened up the cormorant season in Ontario was the boost in taxidermy. People were quite interested in them.
Yeah,
so,
it'd be interesting to see if people use retrievers with them, because I don't know, they got big sharp beaks.
Oh, they certainly do.
That bill could do some damage.
Yeah.
But
we talked about that when they opened the crane season as well.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Here's another very good one for hunters. Wanton waste when it comes to black bears and cougars. For years, we have been required to only take the hide.
Right. And so people have taken the hide, and a number of people eat black bears, and we received a surprising number of letters from people saying, I hunt bears for the meat, but I'm required to keep the hide, and every time I do this, it's a few $100 hit to get it processed, or I end up with a freezer full of hides because I'm not allowed to abandon them or waste them. So the new change is for black bears and cougars, and it's predominantly aimed at black bears, is you may abandon and waste a hide if you recover the meat. So you have to recover the meat like you would for an ungulate, like a deer or a moose. You have to tag it. And if you tag the meat and keep it, you can leave the hide in the bush.
I think that comes a long ways to showing more respect for these critters too.
I agree.
Black bears often, I just did a Brad Weiss podcast on black bears and said they're the Rodney Dangerfield of game because they get no respect and they didn't have a lot of protection, but they are a valuable resource. They do have great protein and good table fare. Yeah. So I think this really helps to modernize the act again. Same with cougars. Cougar hides are very nice, but once you have a cougar rug or a life-size mount, it it gets onerous to deal with it. So, but cougar meat is quite delicious.
Yeah, and I think it absolutely modernizes it. We're now treating black bears as a legitimate big game animal that people shoot for table fare.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about license combos.
Yeah, so if you look in your hunting guide, there's often a section on the combinations of licenses you're allowed to hold, and for many species, you can only hold one of within that species. So you may buy a license, an over-the-counter license, or get drawn, and then in August, you see this list of undersubscribed licenses, excuse me, and you can't buy one because the license combinations won't allow you. So we've now changed it that, in short, you can buy one of any available undersubscribed license, regardless of what licenses you've already bought or drawn. So if you buy a resident elk license, an over-the-counter elk license, you can still buy an undersubscribed antlerless elk. In fact, if you've drawn an antlerless elk and there's an undersubscribed, you can buy one of those as well. And so this will mostly impact elk, because at the end of the year, we're often left with a lot of undersubscribed licenses that go unsold because people would buy them, but they can't because of the license they already hold.
Correct.
And so if we're willing to have these hunted and they're part of our quota, we may as well let them be sold.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I think that'll come into play most with elk and maybe mule deer. But I mean, how often is there a moose tag left over in the undersubscribed these days in Alberta?
That's right. People often bring up the moose issue and go, boy, you could have 2 bull moose now. Well, by the rules, yes, if you draw an antlered moose and there's an antlered moose undersubscribed available, you can buy that too. But almost all the undersubscribes are way in northern Alberta, like the very north end, 500 units.
Right.
Moose is just not an animal that we have, more supply than demand in Alberta. So
you have to go where access is limited.
That's right. Strange how that works.
Yeah, no kidding.
This podcast was made possible by Alberta Conservation Association and the Harvest Your Own community. If you're interested in harvesting your own food, there's a comprehensive collection of information. To gain insight and knowledge, head to the field, harvest your own protein, prepare it, and taste the results. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a library of information from getting started and geared up to processing, butchering, and cooking wild game to make the connection between health and food.
We talked about caliber changes for rifles and stuff, but there's actually a change for what you can use for hunting wild turkeys in Alberta.
Yeah, and so, we approached this with a mix of sort of rationality and trepidation and said, if we're issuing limited quotas for turkeys, does it matter that they have to get shot with a shotgun? In some jurisdictions, I think people get worked up about that because it's part of the culture. But at the end of the day, if you want to pick one's head off with a 22 mag, okay, that's fine. So yeah, now if you get drawn for a turkey, you can use any weapon that would be legal for an upland bird. So shotgun, rifle, bow, crossbow.
So that'll also modernize what shot we can use, because historically we couldn't use a 410 with TSS because it wasn't the right gauge, and it wasn't it didn't meet the shot restriction either.
Yeah, I should actually go. You've got me on the spot there now. I think we repealed that entire section. Yeah. So if we have, then that would be a good example. You could use number 9 TSS.
Yeah, if you can use anything you can for other game birds, then it would be allowed.
That was. I have to make sure we removed that 410 piece. I think we did, but don't take that to the bank if you're listening to this now.
Right. It's something we'll check up on.
Just double check. Yeah.
One that will be interesting to some people because they always look at outfitting with a jaundice eye. But what about outfitter allocations? Is any changes there?
Yeah, so allocations is not a regulatory function, so that's outside of regs, but we did make a few changes that I think modernize outfitting as well. Just as a very brief list, we used to have this double system of guide to client ratios. You could guide 3 black bear hunters, but only 2 hunters for other species of big game, so we made that 3 across the board. We have now allowed a guide to dispatch a client's wounded animal. So if the client shoots first at the animal and it's known or suspected to be wounded, the guide may dispatch it, provided the client is there to tag it. And so this is common in other jurisdictions, and from an ethical perspective probably makes sense, right? If you know your client has got shot a moose and you're looking at it and you've got a shot opportunity at it, it somewhat makes sense for them to be able to finish it.
Right. Can reduce lost game or wounding.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not a bad deal. No other allocation changes?
No, I don't want to jump past the questions there, but while we're talking about outfitting, we have also required that anybody guiding resident hunters on game birds, notably waterfowl, will be required to be an outfitter guide, right? So there wasn't an exception that if you were guiding a resident Alberta, you didn't need to be an outfitter, and we have regulated and controlled where waterfowl outfitters hunt. So they have to have an allocation or a waterfowl privilege, which is only 4 WMUs, and there's only 4 outfitters that can operate within that area. But if you were guiding residents, you weren't bound by those conditions. And there's a bit of a transition period here to get people used to that. But really the premise was to say, let's make guiding rules fair. For the commercial use of wildlife, these are the rules for everybody if you're guiding someone for gain or reward. That's the premise.
You know, it's interesting because that never used to be a real concern in Alberta, but once we had COVID, there was a real interest by residents to go on guided hunts, and time was limited and there was more time to get out, and it became popular real quick.
Yeah, and the waterfowl change, you only need to be an outfitter with an allocation if you're guiding residents in the fall. In the spring season, you need to be a guide outfitter, but you don't need an allocation. A lot of the snow goose outfitting is for residents, and the nature, as you know, of snow goose hunting is it's highly mobile. So you're often operating in large areas. So we wanted to allow outfitter guides to still do that with their resident clients. So, yeah.
Well, it's good information to make hunters aware. Like if you are hiring the services of an outfitter,
correct,
make sure that they're a registered outfitter and a member of APOS, Alberta Professional Outfitter Society.
That's right, yeah. That's good.
Because the onus would fall down to the hunter.
To both. It's the responsibility of the outfitter guide and the hunter.
Yeah, good. Domestic sheep and goats. There's always concerns. We've had the MOV sheep problems, diseases, and it comes from domestic livestock.
Right. So because the Wildlife Act governs activities related to hunting, we didn't change anything to do with recreation with pack goats or whatever else people may do with sheep and goats in sheep range. But it's now prohibited to hunt while accompanied by domestic sheep or goats in all of the 400 units and a number of the 300s. I could pull them up here, but it's, the units that have sheep, 302, 303, 304, 306, 308, those.
Yeah, it's one of many steps that have been taken in the province to try to protect our bighorn population and range that might overlap with domestic sheep and goats.
Right, and there's a lot of other work that's been done by colleagues who work on wildlife diseases to work with sheep and goat producers, make sure that there's buffer fencing, there's assistance with disease testing. And I know, it may be sensitive for some people who thought, boy, I'd really like to have a pack goat or a couple of pack goats to get into the backcountry, but we really need to stress MOVI outbreaks are really serious.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you can wipe out an entire subpopulation of sheep very quickly.
Yeah.
Like it's no joke.
Yeah, and people might be thinking, well, who would ever use goats? But it's actually become very popular in places like Idaho, where people are packing in on an elk hunt, taking a string of goats, taking all your equipment, tent, sleeping bags, and everything, and actually help hauling meat out.
Yeah. It's actually quite amazing what they can carry, but we really do need to put wild sheep first.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Your hunting and fishing branch is, I'd say you guys have a lot to deal with. Alberta's fortunate. We have more hunting opportunity than most jurisdictions.
We do. Everything
from the high alpines and our sheep and our goats and stuff like that to pronghorn in the prairie and black bears and moose and stuff. But, moose is a prime example that has changed over the years. We probably have more moose in the parkland and prairie areas than we do in the boreal now.
Those populations have increased, and as you said, we have an embarrassment of riches. I think it was Winston Churchill who said that the challenges of success can often be worse than those of failure, and so we have wonderful wildlife resources, high diversity, very passionate stakeholders. So yes, there's often a lot to deal with, and people are heavily invested in this. I've worked with contractors who don't work in fish and wildlife or conservation, and they're sometimes just astounded at how involved the stakeholders are. So yeah, it's finding solutions that work for people. Trying to optimize quality hunting experiences, hunting opportunities, with an eye to conservation, sustainability, and recognizing that it is still a public resource that exists on a very diverse landscape, everywhere from wilderness to ag fields where conflict occurs, for example.
Right. There's a lot to deal with. You know, anyone that's applying for the draws knows that it's diverse. If you want to apply for 12, 13 draws, it's not a big chore to find those types of opportunities in Alberta.
That's right.
But to manage it for the species and for all of the hunters, like our population in Alberta has doubled. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think we can brag that our hunting numbers have gone up as well because, you know, it's a goal is to sustain our conservation programs and stuff by hunting license fees. We need more hunters. So it's a catch-22. It makes your job almost a double-edged sword at times.
Yeah. So, you know, you add in growing population, more infrastructure, you know, changing land uses to, you know, improve food security. We're at 152,000 hunters the last year, and we've been around 150,000 since COVID. So not a historic high, but much higher than the 90s, for example. And so there's a lot of pressure on wildlife, and there's a lot of interest in wildlife. And so it makes optimizing management a real challenge. It's very multifaceted.
Very interesting. So all of these changes to the Wildlife Act, and are you calling them modernization of the Wildlife Act?
Yeah, we called the whole project the Wildlife Act and Regulation Modernization Project.
Yeah, I think most of them will make hunters smile overall.
I think so.
You know, there's some great changes there. I know I'm thrilled to be able to take my girls out bird hunting with me this fall, and they've been practicing with air guns and their 410s, so I think they're ready to go.
Yeah, that's excellent. And we do have information online at My Wild Alberta, and we are going to have a synopsis of these changes in the annual hunting regs guide as well.
Awesome. Is there anything else that we should discuss? Any other big changes that we need to note for people? I mean, there's, you know, like you mentioned, over 70 changes, 240 overall. It's a lot to digest all at once. We've talked about age requirements and crossbows, dogs, outfitting allocations, changes for license combinations. I mean, this is all huge stuff that hunters should be celebrating.
It is. I think, you know, there are more changes. I don't know if we'll get into the weeds of administrative changes right now. I think we covered some of the big ones. You will see a change in name, for example. We don't call trophy sheep and trophy antelope trophy anymore. And actually, this was a stakeholder-driven change. They're now called Class 1. And a non-trophy is called a Class 2. And we were the only jurisdiction that in a regulation that I could see called trophy sheep trophies. You know, Idaho, Montana may have a trophy management objective in certain areas, but they call them something else, like mature bighorn.
Right.
And so you and I understand what trophy means, where it comes from, and its many meanings. It's seen as a little crass by many people, right? Yeah. Like, why would you treat the provincial animal as just a trophy? But you and I know that it's a lot more than that. So we just removed that word.
Interesting.
So we've replaced that. So hunters will see that as well. Definition of a vehicle. It included wheelchairs. So we just thought, boy, that's a little unfair that you can't shoot from a non-powered wheelchair.
Right.
You know, so sounds small, but it affects a small group of people who will be happy to know that if they want to sit in a ground blind and shoot from their wheelchair, they don't need a special permit.
Yeah, and I interviewed a few of them and wrote an article on it for Harvest Your Own about accessibility for hunters, and they're so thankful for that change that it is beyond words for them.
Yeah, it's just such a simple change. So motorized wheelchairs are still a vehicle, but you know, if you've got someone who's willing to help you with access, boy, why would you have another hurdle?
Yeah, exactly. You know, you've opened the door to a lot of other changes too. We'll probably see changes to tagging and evidence of sex and all that for the future.
That's right. So we changed language in the regulation. You're not going to see a change to tags this fall. We do have a new physical tag forthcoming. We were hoping to roll it out this fall. We may not have it, but it's going to be a notch style tag. So people listening may have seen the tags where you cut out the year, the month, and the day with your knife or a punch or whatever you want in the field. Those tags are coming. They're also better for fish too, because the sticky tags have some problems.
Yes, they did.
The sticky tags have problems in winter too sometimes. And then the other thing is we have included language to open the door to electronic tagging. So there's no date for e-tags. We don't have a plan right now. We've trialed them with fish. We have the means to do it. but we're going to tweak that and work with our enforcement services to make sure that if we have an e-tag, which will be done on the app on a phone, that there is something visible and tangible that remains on the animal, so that if an officer is doing an inspection, they can see that an animal's marked. So if there's a deer in the back of the truck, they can see a mark on it, and they don't have to get suspicious. Yeah. But it's coming one day.
You know, it's interesting you bring that up, because I see a lot of the changes that you've made are already in place in other jurisdictions. So you talk about the tagging, and I've hunted Kansas and Oklahoma, places where you have e-tag. First thing you have to do is fill out a piece of paper and zip tie it to your deer's leg, and then you phone in and get your confirmation number, and has to go on your tag. But your hunting report with that confirmation number goes to the taxidermist or your meat processor or anyone that follows the animal, just like it would a regular tag number.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's a solution. And then other places, as we discussed earlier, Texas requires you to still put a mark on the animal, whether it's, your own duct tape or something, right, just again to satisfy that immediate inspection by an enforcement officer, that they don't use. Right now, if they saw an animal in your truck or quarters and they're untagged, they're suspicious, as they should be. Right.
Well, I want to thank you personally for working on this, Brian. I think this is a huge step again for Alberta's hunting community, and we'll see the benefits from it for years to come.
I hope so.
And, I'm sure. I mean, just being able to include more people, and someone that might have been restricted by the size of a firearm in the past that can now get out and partake, it'll be big news, especially for certain individuals. So job well done. The fishing and hunting branch has a lot on their plate, as we discussed. It's so diverse, but I think we're moving forward with stuff like this.
Yep, we are working pretty hard to get some tangible results, and really make hunting and fishing, enhance it, make it accessible, make it high quality.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking time to share your information and some of the history of these changes with us today.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thank you.
We hope to inspire people to reconnect with nature and appreciate where your food comes from by harvesting your own. For more information on getting started, or to learn specifics about the Field to Fork experience, visit harvestyourown.ca and follow on Facebook and Instagram. Check back often for new material, recipes, and videos that are posted regularly. Please subscribe to Harvest Your Own podcast and take the time to rate and review the show to help us build a dedicated core of passionate hunters as our regular audience. Until next time, embrace the outdoors and all it has to offer. Thanks for joining us.